Hello everybody and welcome to another media studies lesson. So this is our introductory topic, an introduction to the media, and we are on a lesson here on context. Context is our kind of subtopic that we're looking at the moment. If you're new to all of this, I highly recommend you go back and watch all of these lessons from the beginning. Each lesson builds upon the one that's come before it. I'll always try and deliver these lessons as if it was like me in a classroom. So what you're going to need is a mini whiteboard and a whiteboard pen, and then an exercise book or some kind of note paper to make your notes and complete some of the tasks. So at this point, my students would be coming in silence. They'd see this on the screen and they would be getting on with these questions independently. This is low stakes quiz. It says in the top right there, LSQ, that's low stakes. There's nothing riding on this. Just see if we can remember it, get our juices flowing. If you have been following the lessons from the beginning, then these should be relatively straightforward questions. If you're a teacher and you'd like these lesson PowerPoints to deliver for yourself, there should be a link in the description to the TES Shop where you can get these. Most of these first introductory lessons are free anyway. And if you're a student, then I hope you're enjoying what you're getting here. It might be you're here for revision, or maybe you're just interested in the media in general. Okay, so tackle these questions. Do feel free to pause this video at whatever point you like if it helps you out. I'll try and give rough guides on times as we go through. Okay, so question number one. What are the 4 topics we study on this course? Well, that's media language, representations, audiences, and industries. Question 2, what does OSMP stand for? Well, that's online, social, and participatory media. What are the 3 formats? Well, we've given you a clue in question 2 there. It's print, broadcast, and OSMP. And what is the difference between old and new media? Well, old media, known as old because it's old-fashioned, is your print and your broadcast. And that's because it's one way. You can't do anything apart from change the channel, pick a different newspaper. You can't interact with it. OSMP is interactive, and that makes it new media. How many waves of feminism have there been, and when were they? So we have 4 waves of feminism. First wave was around the 1800s to the 1900s. Second wave, 1960s. Third wave, 1990s, and fourth wave is now. As a reminder, with all of these context lessons, these are not history lessons or sociology lessons. This is just enough to get you through media studies. It's having that, what we call cultural capital, having some background knowledge, some context about what was going on in the world to help with what's coming later for the actual course content. So in your books, what you want to write down now is today's date to keep your notes organized, and the title, which there is in red, Social Contexts, Civil Rights. I wouldn't worry about writing down the lesson objective. It's on the screen the whole way through. Waste time, really. Just know what we're doing, which is today, you need to be able to explain how the civil rights movement challenged racial inequality and influenced, and still influences, representations in the media. Again, what I do at this point is just a little thing called a prerequisite knowledge check. What that means is, do the students in front of me know what they need to be able to actually access this lesson? So do you know the answer to these questions? What does context actually mean? And what does representations mean? Now, you won't have done representations as a topic yet, but you should have a rough idea of what it means. So context is the surrounding information you need to know about media products, what was going on at the time when they were produced, what events were happening, what people believed, what society was doing, and how all of that influences the media. Also, it's about how the media at the time might influence the people themselves. So representations is the way people, places, events, and ideas are shown in the media. And hopefully that's obvious to why that relates to the content of what we're doing now. So quick recap. Context is about the surrounding information we need to know and understand. It's about what was happening at the time. It includes things like social attitudes, laws, historical events, political ideas, the way different groups and people are treated. Today, we're specifically looking at this part here, civil rights, and how the civil rights movement affected society and the media. So as always, my students like to write down definitions as soon as they see them before I get to discuss them. So what I suggest you do here is pause the video, and you're going to go to the back of your books and you're going to keep a terminology list. Again, if you've been following these lessons from the beginning, you'll already have one set up. Add these 2 words to your terminology lists and then play the video when you're ready. So before we move on, I want to quickly check these 2 keywords that you've probably heard before: prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice means making a judgment about a group of people without any proper knowledge or evidence or experience. In simple terms, prejudice is about prejudging someone. So you've already made up your mind about them before you actually know them as a person. For example, someone might wrongly assume something about a person because of their race, their gender, their religion, sexuality, age, or background. Now, that judgment might stay inside someone's head as an attitude or belief. But discrimination is when that prejudice turns into unfair treatment. So if prejudice is the unfair belief, discrimination is the unfair action or doing something based on that prejudice. For example, refusing someone a job, treating them worse at school, or excluding them or mocking them or denying them the same opportunities just because of the group they belong to. So in simple terms, prejudice is prejudging and discrimination is acting unfairly because of that prejudice. So these are two words you may have heard before, and I want to make sure that we're using them properly because they're really important for understanding civil rights, racism, and representation in the media. Mainly because a lot of prejudice can come from the way certain people and groups are represented in the media. To be clear again, these are what we would call working definitions. I know many people could argue with there's better definitions than this, but this works for us and it works for media. Again, these are not history lessons or sociology lessons. This is just a media lesson to give us that. Well, it's the context to help us with these media lessons. Another two words we're going to need are on the screen here as well. Again, pause the video and add these words to your definitions. So before we look at the civil rights movement itself, we need to make sure we actually understand these two key terms. First, what is civil rights? Well, civil rights are the basic rights and freedoms that all people should have in a society. That means things like being treated equally by the law, being able to vote, being able to access education, being safe, and being allowed to take part in society fairly. So when we talk about the civil rights movement, we're talking about people campaigning for these rights that really they should already have had. To be clear, the civil rights movement focused largely on Black and other ethnic minority groups. So these people were not asking for special treatment, they're asking to be treated equally. The second key term here is racism. Racism means belief, prejudice, discrimination directed against someone because of their race. It's often based on the false belief that one race is superior to another. So a lot of these ideas, especially in the UK, often come from very old colonialist attitudes. That word superior is important. It means better than. So racism is not just disliking someone, it's connected to power and inequality and the idea that one group should be treated as more important than another. These words matter because the civil rights movement was about challenging racism and fighting for civil rights. In media studies, this also links to representation because the media can either challenge racist ideas or repeat them. That's a lot from me already. So, on your mini whiteboards, in as fewer words as possible, in your own words, what does civil rights mean? So it should be the rights and freedoms that everyone should have, regardless of their gender, race, sexuality, or any specific group. So again, in as fewer words as possible, in your own words, what is racism? So you should have something like treating people differently because of their race. Also thinking that certain races are superior or better than others. Right, the content of our lesson, the civil rights movement, largely between the 50s and 60s. The civil rights movement was a major campaign for racial equality, mainly in America during this time. It was led by Black Americans and their allies who were challenging racism, segregation, and discrimination. At the time, especially in the southern states of America, Black people and white people were often kept separate, and that was called segregation. Black Americans could be forced to use different schools, buses, toilets, restaurants, cinemas, public spaces. This was not just people being racist in everyday life. In many places, racism was actually built into the law. The civil rights movement challenged this unfair treatment through protests and marches and speeches and boycotts. A boycott is when people refuse to use or buy something as a form of kind of protest. One famous example was the Montgomery bus boycott, and that began after Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus in the 1950s. Rosa Parks was sitting on the black section of a segregated bus, and the white section became full, so the driver told her to move so a white passenger could sit down. She refused and was arrested. Can you imagine living in a world where Black people were considered so inferior to white people, but by law? Well, that was only 70-ish years ago. Another key figure was Martin Luther King, who argued for peaceful, non-violent protest. You can see him here in the middle image. His famous I Have a Dream speech in 1963, that became one of the most important moments of the movement. The movement helped bring about major changes in the law. The Civil Rights Act in 1964, that made racial segregation illegal. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 made it harder for states to stop Black Americans from voting. So the civil rights movement was about changing laws, mainly in America, but it was also about changing society. It challenged the idea that Black people were inferior or less important or should have fewer opportunities. Now, unfortunately, social attitudes towards race didn't change as quickly as the law did. Black people could no longer legally be kept separate from white people in public spaces, so schools, buses, shops, and toilets. However, many white people still resisted these changes, and you can see that in the final image there. In a nutshell, the civil rights movement was a major campaign, mainly in America, to challenge racism, segregation, and discrimination. It helped change laws, but it also was about changing society and challenging the idea that Black people were inferior or less important. For media studies, this matters because the movement affected how race is represented in the media. A lot of media was coming from America in the 60s, and with the introduction of television, the civil rights movement was spread around the world and impacted other countries. If we look at a media product from before, during, or even shortly after this period, representations of race are connected to these wider social and historical changes. So again, there was a lot there, but in your own words and in as fewer words as possible, on your mini whiteboard, what was the civil rights movement and when was it? So you should have something like a major campaign for racial equality, mainly in America, especially during the 50s and 60s. So, in my classroom now, I'd want to make sure my students have taken on board what we've been discussing. So for that, we would do a series of brief turn-in talks based on some statements. Now, if you followed these lessons, you've seen this before. When I say go and not before, we're going to do a series of brief turn-in talks. I will reveal 4 statements on the board, one at a time, and you would discuss this with your partner. If you're watching this video on your own, you're going to have an internal discussion with yourself. First of all, decide whether you think the statement is true, false, or possibly true. Now, it might be that you say it's mostly true or partly false. There's variations within this. It's not always as simple as that's just correct and that's false. So you would write this on your mini whiteboard. Also, we're going to want to know why you think it's true, false, or possibly. So try and give yourself a supporting statement to go with it. Okay, first statement. The civil rights movement ended racism because segregation became illegal. Take a few minutes now, pause the video if you need to think about that statement. So it's largely false. Segregation became illegal in public places, but racist attitudes, prejudice, discrimination, unequal representation still continued and continue to this day. Racism is in no way ended or solved. The civil rights movement was only relevant in America. Again, that's false. The main movement happened in America, but civil rights are not only an American issue. Television was instrumental in helping the civil rights movement create change. So that's mostly true. Television spread the message around the world as it was happening. It wasn't the only factor in helping it, but it was a large one. The television was just becoming mainstream across the entire world, and it allows people to see things that are happening live. We should not judge media from the past by today's attitudes. Got to be possibly. Context helps us understand these racist representations, but it doesn't excuse them. So not judging media from the past by today's attitudes, well, we need to understand why it was done. Hopefully now you have enough knowledge to be able to answer this question. This will now be in the front of your books. What was the civil rights movement and how did it impact the media? We're moving away from simple definitions here. We're not just defining it. We need to explore it and explain it. So in a moment when I say go, you're going to write about what we've just explored in the front of your books. This is your chance to explain the civil rights movement in more detail. You need to write in full sentences. What was the civil rights movement? When and where did it mainly happen? How were black people treated and why were they treated unfairly? How people challenged racism? What was the impact of television on this? And why does all of this matter to the media? Try and use words like prejudice, discrimination, segregation. Use a ruler if you're going to do subheadings. Keep it neat. As always, here is a little bit of support for you should you need it. But this is the bare minimum. This is just to get you going. Pause the video now. Give yourself about 5 minutes for this. Again, my students like to write down definitions as soon as they appear. So if you want to pause the video here and add these two definitions to the back of your books, do that now. So the civil rights movement has led to a much more progressive, inclusive, and equal society. Today, lots of media products represent race in a much more inclusive way. However, lots of media products try to look more inclusive, but maybe they aren't. Inclusivity means that they try to include people from different races, cultures, genders, sexualities, ages, body types, and backgrounds. And this can be a good thing because it means more people are visible in the media. It can suggest that society is becoming more equal, more accepting. However, we still need to be critical. Just because a media product includes a diverse range of people, that does not automatically mean that that representation is meaningful. Tokenism is when someone is included just to make a media product look diverse, but they're not always given real importance or power or personality or a voice. So the question is not just, are different groups included? The better question is, how are they included? Let's have a look at this poster from His Dark Materials, a TV show. Here, black characters are not just placed in the background. They're not being shown as less important or less powerful. They're not only there to support white characters. They are part of the main world of the story. They're shown as important, powerful, serious, and central to the narrative. This could be argued to be an example of real, genuine inclusivity. Now, let's compare that with this Coca-Cola advert. This one's a little bit more complicated. We could argue that this advert is inclusive because it shows a diverse friendship group. The black woman is visible, central, smiling, part of a positive social moment. So one reading or interpretation is that Coca-Cola is showing diversity as normal and positive. However, we also need to remember that adverts are constructed. This is not a random photo of a real group of friends. It's not a private moment that just happened to be captured. This has been planned. The models have been chosen. The clothing, the pose, the facial expressions, the product placement, the composition have all been built to create a certain meaning. So another reading is that this feels slightly tokenistic. The black woman is very deliberately placed in the center, being hugged and highlighted, almost as if the advert wants us to notice that the brand is being inclusive. This could feel less like a natural friendship group, more like Coca-Cola trying to demonstrate diversity. Now, this doesn't mean that the advert is definitely bad or racist. It just means we can read it critically. It might be inclusive, but it may also be using diversity to create a positive brand image. And that matters because even though many legal battles around civil rights have been won, representation is still complicated. The media is still not always fair, equal, or genuinely inclusive. So how does that fit in with today's lesson? Well, context is not only what was happening when an old media product was made, context also includes the wider social history that shapes how modern audiences understand media made today. Modern representations of race do not appear from nowhere. They're shaped by their history, shaped by changes in expectations, shaped by society. So, on your mini whiteboards, in your own words, in as fewer words as possible, what does inclusivity mean? Hopefully you got something like, different groups of people are included fairly and respectfully. It means they're not ignored, hidden, or treated as less important. Again, on your mini whiteboards, in as fewer words as possible, but in your own words, what does tokenism mean? So that would be including someone from a minority group just to make a media product look diverse or inclusive. It might look fair at first, but the person may not have much power, personality, voice, or importance. In my classroom now, I would be asking my students to do an analysis of this advert like we just did with the His Dark Materials and Coca-Cola advert. So the big question here is, does this advert feel genuinely inclusive, or could it be seen as tokenistic? Now, if you're watching this video on your own, it's going to be a little hard to have a discussion about it, but try and put your thoughts down on your mini whiteboard. Here are a couple of questions that might help you consider this advert. Who is included? Who is central? Who seems to have power and status? Does it feel natural, or does it feel forced and constructed? Do the words on the advert change anything? Give yourself 2 or 3 minutes to bullet point your thoughts on your mini whiteboard. At this point, I would be asking students for feedback, and most of the lesson here would be about what they're saying. What we get in the past, or what I've had in the past, I should say, is things that make it feel inclusive. It feels inclusive because the black man is not pushed into the background. He's central, confident, stylish. He's actually represented as equal to the white woman in the advert. However, it can also feel slightly tokenistic because the words more colour, more life make the idea of diversity feel very deliberate. It's almost as if Ray-Ban, the manufacturer of these glasses, is pointing at its own inclusivity. It's almost saying, look how diverse and modern we are. And that might make the representation feel less natural, more like a way of selling the brand rather than being genuinely inclusive and diverse. Again, these are just different interpretations. So in the front of your books, how would you talk about this piece of media? This is a game case for Harry Potter. How does this game cover show modern attitudes towards race and inclusivity? So in a moment when I say go, you're going to write about this game cover in the front of your books. And this is your chance to apply the ideas we've explored about inclusivity and tokenism. You need to write in full sentences. You need to explain whether this game cover feels inclusive, or could it be seen as tokenistic? Who's shown as central and important? How are the characters represented? Is the representation meaningful, or is it just surface level? And think about why modern media products might try to show race and diversity more fairly. Try and use words like inclusivity, tokenism, diversity, but also representation, power, status, construction. Use a ruler if you're using subheadings, keep it neat. As always, here's a little bit of support to help you get going, but this is the bare minimum, and I'm sure you've got a lot to say about this. Pause the video here, give yourself at least 5 minutes for this. So that brings us to the end of the lesson. Hopefully you now can explain a little bit about how the civil rights movement has challenged racial inequality and how that has influenced representations in the media. You should be able to relatively easily answer the following questions. What is the difference between prejudice and discrimination? What are civil rights? What is racism? What was the civil rights movement and when was it? What does inclusivity mean? And what does tokenism mean? Feel free to go back and rewatch those questions. Could you answer those now? Now, if for any reason we had a bit more time, say we haven't got through that lesson very quickly, here is an extension activity, something that you can work on yourself. I like to make the extension activities a big think question. So racial equality has not been fully achieved because the media still does not always represent race fairly or meaningfully. To what extent do you agree? Thank you very much for listening and for your time. Hopefully you'll enjoy the next videos coming up. Don't forget, if you want to purchase this PowerPoint, you can do that. There's a link in the description below. And please do add to the comments, but keep the comments nice. Thanks for your time.